Welcome to Linda's Corner. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about living life joyfully. I'm excited to welcome special guest Andy Watts. And first, I like to share how I know Andy, or at least how I know of him, and why I'm so excited that he is willing to share his story with us today. My husband Lewis is an airline pilot. He works for SkyWest, and he really likes his job. But like most jobs, some days are better than others. And one thing that really helps Lewis have a good day is if his co-pilot is easy to get along with. He says if he's flying with someone who is interesting and fun, like the days he gets to fly with Andy, who is also a pilot at SkyWest, then the day is better. He says he feels like the plane goes faster. But if he's flying with someone who has a negative attitude, then the days can drag. So Andy makes my life better by simply being awesome. Because if my husband has a good day at work, then he's more fun to be around when he's home. And Lewis also appreciates Andy's sense of humor. For example, my husband builds airplanes as a hobby, and his current project is a Europa that he named Big Jimmy. He was super excited when he finished the wings, and he showed up at work and announced, "Big Jimmy got new wings!" And Andy thought that was kind of funny. So now instead of saying hello, he greets him with, "Big Jimmy got new wings." And one time when Lewis was in Denver for some flight training, he was learning how to fly a new airplane. And the training was super intense and stressful. And during one of the breaks, another pilot that Lewis didn't know walked up to him and said, "Are you Lewis? I just got a text from Andy Watts, and he said that I'm supposed to tell you that Big Jimmy got new wings. Does that mean anything to you?" And Lewis totally started laughing and told him the story, and being able to laugh and tell a story helped reduce the stress a little bit. And again, it helped Lewis have a better day. Another thing that Lewis loves about Andy is the way he prioritizes his time and his family. Andy puts his family first. His wife and his kids are more important to him than work. And he's always taking his kids skiing and playing with them and spending time with them. Andy knows that spending time with the people you love is precious. He has 3 children, ages 10, 7, and 5, and he calls them his miracle kids. His beautiful wife, Lindsay, was 16 weeks pregnant with their first child when Andy was diagnosed with cancer. Shortly after Christmas in 2010, he began an aggressive fight with cancer that changed everything. And that is the story that Andy is going to share with us today. So Andy, first of all, I want to thank you for making my life better by being an awesome person and helping my husband be happier. And thank you for being willing to visit with me today and to share your story, which I think will help a lot of people.
Well, thanks for having me on, Linda. You make me seem a lot better than I really am. So.
Well, you got to know that everything pretty much that I know about you is coming from these unsolicited testimonials because Lewis thinks you are awesome.
Well, I think I got Lewis fooled then.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. So
Yeah.
I gave the super short version of the whole cancer thing. Can I have the extended version?
So, in 2010, I was diagnosed with cancer in October of 2010. And as you can imagine, that is, as a 29-year-old individual, that's not the words you would expect to ever hear in your life. And you thought only old people experience cancer. And that's where it all began in October. And I went through a surgery shortly after I was diagnosed. And then I was scheduled to have a really intensive surgery where I was going to have a 12-inch incision from my belly button up through my chest, and the organs were going to come out and start stripping lymph nodes because it had metastasized. We were in my like you had mentioned, my wife Lindsay was pregnant, and we were in the 3D ultrasound the day before the really intense surgery was supposed to happen. You can imagine I was a mess. And this is the first time we had seen our little boy, who's named Charlie. He's 10 now, but we were looking at the images and the 3D images of our little boy and that Lindsay was carrying. And I was a complete disaster, as you can imagine, because I didn't know if I'd ever see that child.
Oh, that's
And here I am looking at the screens of him, and not knowing if I'd see him.
Wow.
And my phone kept ringing during that whole procedure. As you can imagine, there were a lot of prayers, a lot of fasting that had taken place over the course of the 2 weeks from one surgery to the next. But my phone kept ringing during that whole 3D ultrasound of that experience. And it was my doctor at the cancer hospital up at Huntsman, and he kept calling and calling, but I didn't answer the phone. And when I got out of that appointment with her OB-GYN doctor, I listened to my voicemails, and there was a couple of them from my doctor, and I was assuming it was just about the procedure that was going to take place with me in the morning. He had said, we're not doing that surgery tomorrow. And he had decided not to do it anymore because the pathology came back from, the report came back that, I guess it would be called a biopsy, right, or something like that, had come back, and it was the better of the two type of cancer. So all they needed to do at that point was chemotherapy. So anyway, that's kind of how it all began. It was a pretty stressful couple months, and I waited a few weeks before chemotherapy started, which I jumped for joy because I didn't have to have that surgery.
So where was your cancer? You said you were split from here to here, or were going to be
split
I was
from
cut.
There. I was cut. It was testicular cancer.
Oh, okay.
So they had to take the tumor out. But it had metastasized into my lymph system, so my lymph nodes had
that spreads
grown
everywhere.
And so it spread in my back mainly, and so they were going to, I can't remember the technical or the medical term for it, but they were going to cut me open and take out the organs around it and then strip those lymph nodes out of my back because they can't go through your back. But they decided I had seminoma versus non-seminoma, and seminoma was the better of the two. And so they decided to treat it with chemotherapy.
And what was that like? How long did that last?
Chemotherapy?
Mm-hmm.
So chemotherapy, I didn't even know what it was. I knew people did it. I didn't really know what it was. I jumped for joy that I did not have to have that surgery because I'd had one surgery where they removed the tumor, and then I had to wait a week to recover, and then I was going to go into that other procedure. But with that being canceled, I was so excited that I just had to do chemotherapy. So this was about middle of November now, and they told me that I would wait. I was going to do a PET scan to see if the cancer had metastasized into my brain, if it had spread into my brain. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I had to wait a couple weeks before I could get myself in a position to have the PET scan. I did the PET scan. That came back negative, so that was 100%. Let's do chemotherapy, which started 2 days after Christmas. And chemotherapy, for those that have experienced chemotherapy or have watched someone that has gone through chemotherapy, me not knowing was a good thing. I didn't know what chemotherapy was. Now that I know what chemotherapy is like, I don't know if I could ever begin.
It's very probably hard. Wouldn't really have jumped for joy.
Yeah, wouldn't have jumped for joy. But at that point, I was happy to just not be doing that surgery. But chemotherapy's tough. I had a lot of complications. I went through testicular cancer is very, very treatable and very, very curable if you catch it early. Mine wasn't really caught early. I was in stage 2. There's only 3 stages of it. At stage 3, it's too far. Different stages of stage 3. They don't do like stage 4. But I was in stage 2. And so it's a very aggressive cancer that spreads very quickly. But so you treat it very, very, really aggressively. So they put me on a regimen that I had some complications. The regimen they put me on is a regimen that was created for Lance Armstrong. So that doctor his doctor pretty much created this, from my understanding, for Lance. And that's when they started to treat it. My doctor told me if I was late 80s, early 90s, probably with this type of cancer, they wouldn't have been able to treat it.
Oh, wow.
So they were able to treat it, but it was hard. You'd go 5 days. I did what they call BEP. It consisted of 3 chemotherapy drugs. I started and I did pretty good day 1, day 2. Day 3, I started to get sick. Day 4, I started to get really sick. So I'd go 5 straight days of chemotherapy. I was at the Huntsman Cancer Hospital for 6 hours. That. Me neither, Linda. And I didn't even, like I said, didn't know what chemotherapy was. But when I got in the infusion room and sat in my chemo chair, I tried to make small talk in light of the situation that I had been presented. And the patient that sat next to me got up. He sat down, got chemotherapy, and left. And, I'm an hour into my 6-hour treatment. Another patient sits down, gets up an hour later and leaves. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? So the nurse comes over, and when they put the chemotherapy, I did mine through my veins because I was young, and they told me I had good veins. A lot of people do ports and PICC lines. Uh-huh. So I could go on forever, and I'll spare you the details on those. But so I'd go through my veins, and these people would just hook up the port and leave. And I asked the nurse, as she would hook me up to my chemo, she changed through the different drugs that They would wear long gloves, lab coats. They'd put on goggles. They didn't want any of this to touch them. So I said, why? You're putting this in my body, but you won't even touch it. So it's kind of an eye opener, right?
That's scary.
And I said, I've sat here through 3 different patients, and I've still got 4 hours, or no, roughly 3 hours now. What's going on? Am I dying? And they're not telling me exactly what's going on. And she said, no, yours is a very aggressive cancer, but a very treatable cancer. So we really have to attack this cancer. So so day 4 came and went. By day 5, I was so sick that I got admitted into the hospital because I was so weak and I couldn't keep anything down. And I had some very severe side effects after 5 days of straight chemo. That they would do. It wasn't 6 hours of straight chemo. It was 2 hours of prehydration, 2 hours of chemo, 2 hours of post hydration because they didn't want my kidneys to fail with all that. So they'd fill me with fluid, give me the chemo, and then fill me with fluid again.
Wow.
But I was struggling so bad by the weekend that they put me into the hospital, and I was cheering at that point because I thought they would stop chemo. I said, they're just going to stop now because I'm struggling so bad. But they didn't. My doctor actually emailed the doctor back in Indiana that created the regimen and said, my patient Andy is not doing very well with cisplatin. I think it might kill him. And the response from the doctor was, it's the only chance he has, continuous cisplatin.
Wow.
And so I laid in that hospital bed. I was on morphine at that point. So I don't know if you've ever been on morphine, but I was hallucinating, and it's not recommended. But I was in the hospital thinking I was just weird dreams and thinking they're not going to give me chemo anymore. I can't wait. And that morning they came in, and my oncologist came in and hooked me back up to cisplatin. And I thought, what are we doing here? I thought we wouldn't do this anymore because he kind of had made it. And he told me what that doctor said back in Indiana. I believe it was the actual doctor, Lance Armstrong's doctor, that he communicated with, and said, "There's so much chance you have." And I would do 5 days that they'd send me home. Then I'd have a couple days off. Then I'd come back and do one drug on Tuesdays. And then I'd go home and recover for a couple days, do the other drug on Tuesday, recover for a couple days, and then I'd go back for a full week of chemo. And that lasted for 3 months.
Wow.
And in that process, I went in you kind of gear yourself up mentally for that. I'll keep talking, stop me if you don't want me to continue.
Keep going.
But during that process, I would get my labs done before I'd start my long week to see kind of where my white blood count was and where everything was to make sure I was healthy enough to start chemo because they pretty much wipe everything out. So you gear yourself up mentally. And I remember that Sunday thinking, I got to start my long week tomorrow. And mostly me and my wife were getting ready for it because it was quite hard. And I went in and got my labs drawn, and they sent me home because they couldn't do chemotherapy. Because my white blood count was so low, they told me if I had gotten sick or anything like that, I probably wouldn't be able to fight the infection. So they sent me home and put me on a shot called Neupogen. And I'd get shot for 10 days, and that would increase my bone marrow to produce those white blood cells so quickly. But that was an awful experience because your body aches like you have the flu times 10. I couldn't sit anywhere. I couldn't lay anywhere because my body throbbed everywhere. And now they were doing was producing white blood cells just to wipe them out again, right? With the chemotherapy. So it was a roller coaster ride. But I remember my first day, and this is, sorry to kind of switch gears here. I remember my first day of chemotherapy. I sat in that infusion room up at the Huntsman Cancer Hospital, and the nurses came over to an elderly lady, and had told her that if she could just find the strength, very fatigued, she looked very fatigued, as you are in chemotherapy. If she could find the strength to just walk to her mailbox and back once a day, she would do better. And at that point, I turned to my wife and I said, I'm going to run through this whole thing. And she said, whatever. So I would go home with the IVs hooked to my arms because they'd try to keep them in because they'd poke me every day. I call it poke, but they'd put an IV in every day to start the chemo. But if they could flush it and it wouldn't clot, then they would keep it in for 3 days. So this is the middle of January, or the first part of January. And I'd have all these tubes hooked to my arm, and they'd tape them up because I was coming back in the morning. I'd leave about 4 in the afternoon, be back at 8. And I'd just go home and run in the winter, cold. It was hard. But it was the only thing through chemotherapy that made me feel like I was alive. It was the only thing. Because all I did is live at the hospital and felt sick at home and laid in bed. And so I'd go home and run. And it was stupid as is. My oncologist said, you're going to kill you. It's not good on your heart. I said, Doc, it's the only thing I got left. So that's how I kind of got into, I mentioned to you in my my little text to you that I got into running, and I ran a little bit before, but that's kind of where we decided that that's kind of what kept me feeling like I was still alive. So anybody that experiences chemo, I've visited with a lot of people that came over to my house that have been diagnosed with cancer in my previous house in my neighborhood that I live in now. And, I can say this is how it was for me. It's so different for everybody. But I said, the only thing I can recommend is you find something that can make you feel like you're still alive, that you enjoy doing, because it will be hard to find that one thing. And whether it be, I didn't even want to watch TV. You just don't find joy. There's not a lot of happiness in your life. And so my recommendation to those individuals was, you find something that you can feel like you still have something to live for, And I did. I had a wife and everything, but you just got to feel like you're still there, You're not just something already dying on a bed, anyway. So
Wow.
that's kind of.
So
it.
How far did you run? I can't. You were sick like 10 times the flu, and running.
Not real far. It depended on how cold it was. It was a cold winter that winter, and there were days that the highs were in January 18 degrees, and inversion was thick. But I would try to go 2 to 3 miles.
Whoa!
I'd have to take my phone with my wife. My wife would call me maybe every 10 minutes, make sure I wasn't laying on the side of the road, because she wasn't about to go out there and run. She thought it was stupid. But
and she was pregnant too, right?
She was pregnant, sure. Yeah, she wasn't going to do it. But she would call me, and I said, I want you to follow me in the car. I just want to be able to do this and get through it. And I did it. And so it would just depend on the day. The first of the week of the long weeks, I was feeling pretty good. You felt pretty good going into the long weeks of chemo, those stretches. So the first couple of days, I was, maybe 3 miles. But by the end of the week, I maybe was doing 1.5 miles. And a lot of it, I do remember running with my eyes closed just because I was so tired. But I just kept pushing through it,
Wow,
so,
that is amazing. That's
it. I've ran in some full marathon. I've ran 6 races now since chemotherapy. I've had a couple scheduled this last couple of years, but so I've done 6 marathons and some other races, but they canceled the coronavirus, so I haven't ran a couple. I still run a long distance, but I haven't raced for 18 months now, probably.
So is marathon, is that your favorite distance?
Well, that's about where I'm at. I think the training to go anything further with my 3 little kids it's hard enough to train for a marathon. It's time consuming. You spend a lot of your time in your days running. The people do, 50 Ks and 30-mile runs up mountains, and now they're doing centuries, 100-mile races. And
right.
I don't know. I don't have that endurance in I guess. I don't know. Or that time commitment. But anyway, running saved my life, in my opinion, other than also, the support I had from loved ones and stuff like that, obviously. But
yeah,
that's what I decided when I heard that if she could walk to her mailbox and back, I was going to run. I don't know why I decided that, but I did.
I'm glad you did, because it sounds like it made a huge difference. And it's something that you have enjoyed afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have.
That is really cool. And Lewis mentioned that this whole thing just changed your perspective. Like I said, he's just so impressed that you're skiing with your kids, you're playing, you're taking time with your family, you put them first over work and money and whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, you go through that, Linda. I'm sure you've had experiences in your life, and those that you associate with or you come in contact with. Everybody has something in their life that kind of alters them in one direction.
Right.
And this was you know as good as anybody with your husband being in the airline industry. It's an industry that can take you away from your family.
For sure.
It can take you. You miss out on a lot of things, and it might be necessary to provide for your family and be able to do that. I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that and be able to be there for my family. But I've been able to. Family, it's the most important thing to me. You go through something like that, and the experiences of that just make you. I was young. I was going to be, I was going to fly the biggest airplane I could fly, right? Make the most amount of money. At 29 years old when I got into the industry, I think 28 or whatever. That was the goal. That's where everybody I think starts, and then life happens, right? And then you start to say, is that really important to me? Probably not. So I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to be able to do what I enjoy. I love airplanes. I love flying airplanes, but I'm also very blessed to be able to be a dad and have my kids know who I am, so.
And that is so important, and your kids are so fortunate to have you. We feel the same way, that money, I mean, you can always make up money. If you lose money, you can make it back up, but you can't make up time. Once time is gone, it's a one-way ticket. It's gone.
Yeah.
So, and kids, they
grow
up
and talking
fast.
to Lewis I can't believe you guys have all your kids are grown and some are married, and
I know, crazy sauce.
So when I met Lewis, I think you guys still had 2 at home, right? Probably, and maybe 3, and now your daughter's married, right, and lives in Arizona. And just it's just crazy how fast it goes. So you got to appreciate it when you can, right?
Definitely. And when you have little kids, days can be long, and it seems like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever. And then you turn around, it's like, whoa, where'd it go? They're gone. Everybody's gone. So all those times are precious. So I'm proud of you for just enjoying the journey.
Well,
You're doing awesome.
Well, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm doing it how I want to do it, which is, I guess, important to me, right?
Perfect. I think there's more than one right way to do things. Like running, someone else might pick something different, but I think putting the priorities of putting family and relationships and finding joy in life, I think those are usually the right answer. So good stuff. Awesome. So Andy, thank you so much for joining with me today. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Galileo. He said, "I have loved the stars too fondly to be fearful of the night." Today, I invite you to recognize the light and the stars in your life and to focus on those things rather than the darkness. See you next time on Linda's Corner.